This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
Now at 6, Cincinnati's most infamous and brutal unsolved crime seen through new eyes.
The Bricka murders still spawn rumors and haunt the West Side. Now, a new book aims to clear the air about what happened.
And who might have been responsible for the brutal crime at this home in 1966. Here is Evan Millward.
The only thing left of the Bricka murder investigations, a dusty old case file, some archive film, and memories.
Scared. Everybody got big dogs and deadbolt locks and didn't sit on the porch at night anymore, didn't walk up and down the sidewalk.
It ruined this neighborhood.
It did. Totally ruined it.
She lived down Greenway Avenue from Jerry, Linda, and Debbie Bricka. Judith and Linda were nearly the same age, the youngest housewives on the block.
She had pretty eyes and she had a beauty pageant smile. She had a way with people.
In these previously unreleased photos, you can see why Linda, a stewardess for a time, was turning heads. Jerry was a standout Stanford swimmer and successful at Monsanto's Addison facility. 4-year-old Debbie, precocious. But late on September 25th, 1966, someone ransacked their home. Linda was stabbed 10 times, Jerry 9, Debbie 4. Hers so deep they cut all the way through her body. Why would someone do this?
To cover something up.
Can you say whether you have what you consider to be any good leads or clues in this case at this point? Dean?
I can't say at this point.
52 years later.
This is Cincinnati's seminal crime, and I don't know if it'll ever go away.
J.T. Townsend is a true crime author and historian. Suddenly, the evidence goes away, and what everyone knows as fact goes away, and the rumor takes over.
Right. That's why I wrote this book.
Sheriff Jim Neal granted Townsend full access to the Bricka case file for work on this, a 500-page dissection of the case. In it, he shoots down the persistent rumors.
I think the murder of the child just incensed everybody. Why did they, why, you know, people were thinking this is some kind of robbery gone wrong or some kind. Why did they kill the child? The child could identify at least one of the killers. There's no question in my mind. Was it a Manson-like cult? It couldn't be. It wasn't a mob hit. It wasn't a crime during a robbery. It wasn't a serial killer. The Cincinnati Strangler. Well, that's a whole other story. Maybe it was a Monsanto employee with whom Jerry had clashed. People are just killed sometimes for just the slightest things, you know, disrespect, you know, slights, rumors, greed. But there is something about one suspect, veterinarian Fred Leininger, for whom Linda worked for just 3 days in the week before her death. A piece of tape found on Jerry Bricka's face, one of the few things that didn't belong on the crime scene, came back as medical or veterinary tape. This is what blows my mind, Evan, that if this suspect did it, and he continued to run his business over here till 1995, if you kill 3 people, what part of your brain do you store that in when you go on with your life? An evidence bag in the case file says it contains his hair samples, but he refused to cooperate with investigators and killed himself in 2004. Townsend believes he didn't act alone. Witnesses told investigators they saw 2 people get in a car outside the house that night. Judith Hemmer agrees.
I think there might have been 2 people because Jerry was muscular, very. I just can't see one person taking them both down.
The sheriff's office tells 9 on Your Side the case is still open, has been reviewed several times, and they hope the book sparks conversation leading to new information. I really wanted to put all the rumors to bed and get as much factual information out there as I could. But I mean, we're still talking about Jack the Ripper, Lizzie Borden, JFK. And in Cincinnati, we add the Brickas to that list. I'm Evan Millward, 9 on Your Side.
Crestline, California is a small mountain town located in the popular San Bernardino Mountains of Southern California. Like most of the towns of the mountains of San Bernardino, there is a sizable amount of second homes or cabins that are only used on occasion by the owners, making the community a very quiet and peaceful place to live. The dense woods on the mountains allows for secluded cabins to be tucked away among the trees. The Bowles family was just one of the many part-timers on the mountain. They had recently purchased a small cabin on the outskirts of town to escape the hustle and bustle of Orange County on the weekends. The weekend of August 13, 1965, the family of 4 had piled into the car and made their way up the winding mountain roads to their new slice of tranquility. When James, 41 years old, Darlene, 37 years old, and the 2 boys, Tommy, 13, and Bobby, 12, hadn't returned to their full-time residence in Orange County by Monday, the 16th, extended family started to worry. The cabin was newly built and still didn't have a phone line to call. The mothers of the 2 parents grew increasingly concerned that they called Darlene's brother, Floyd, who in turn contacted the construction company who had built the cabin to see if they could go by and check on the family. Floyd never heard back. Next, he contacted the San Bernardino Sheriff's Office, who said they would pass on the wellness check to a local substation. But again, Floyd didn't hear anything back. Completely frustrated, Floyd decided to check himself and ask an employee of his familiar with the area to go with him. Floyd and his employee reached the cabin at about 5 p.m. Once there, they noticed that neither family car was in the driveway and walked up to the deck to look in the windows. Through the window, Floyd saw Barbara, the family dog, in the couch covered in blood and not moving. Floyd tried the door and found it unlocked. He entered the small cabin, and the couch was covered in blood, and so was everything else. He was moving towards the master bedroom. He saw what had become of his sister and her family. At 5:10 p.m., the 2 men sped off and found the nearest sheriff's substation to report the gruesome discovery. When the investigating officers arrived, they found the scene exactly as Floyd had described it. The family dog dead in the living room along with papers of slippers, shoes, and socks on the living room floor. The 4 family members all dead in the master bedroom, each riddled with bullets. James was laying on his back on the floor, and the bedroom in the pool of blood. 13-year-old Bobby was found in a sitting position, back to the wall. Darlene was found in a crouched position in the closet, indicating she had been shielding her youngest son Tommy at the time of their deaths. Detectives found blood smears in the living room and the dinette area, which seemed to lead back to the bedroom. 35 .22 caliber shell casings were found in the cabin, 5 in the living room and 30 in the bedroom where the family was slain. Blood smears on the bedding in the master bedroom seemed to indicate that a weapon may have been wiped clean on the bed. Detectives were also able to find footprints in size 11 men's in the cabin. Detectives searched outside the cabin for footprints, but it had rained Sunday, the night before the bodies were discovered, so they had no luck. The wallet James carried was found in the cabin but contained no money, which seemed unusual. About 65 yards away, the car was located and detectives staked it out for a while in case the suspect returns, but again, no luck. The local paperboy confirmed that the car had been there since at least 6 a.m. on Sunday, August 15th, when he did his morning deliveries. When the bodies of the family members were examined, each one of them had multiple gunshot wounds. All had numerous fatal wounds to the head and the chest area, as well as wounds to the limbs and extremities. A canvass of the area turned up very little, as most other cabins within reasonable distance were part-timers and had been empty that weekend. The only exception is the first day of canvassing was the Ogles, who had seen James on the evening of Saturday the 14th. He seemed in good spirits and they had chatted for a few minutes before they said their goodbyes. The Ogles hadn't heard anything unusual, but said they probably wouldn't have if there was a very large party happening a few streets away, and they would have been trying to ignore that noise. Another witness said family ate dinner at the local San Mortis Club Saturday evening, and James seemed visibly upset after making a phone call. Yet another contact stated James had told them the family was going to have a visitor around 8 p.m. on the evening of Saturday the 14th. Detectives contacted many other full-time residents of the town and part-timers who may have been around on that fateful weekend. Also questioned were friends, family, and co-workers of the couple detectives. But they didn't get any potential leads. No evidence was ever able to be conclusively tied to anyone either. Several suspects with no motive were questioned and interviewed, but in the vicinity they were vetted and cleared. Darlene's ex-husband, Harvey M. Fulton, was also a suspect. Rumors abound at Hughes Aircraft where that Darlene and James worked that Fulton had harassed them. Even Darlene's family also had a suspect to point at. The most promising suspect came in the form of George Robert Stewart, who was wanted on a mental warrant from Alabama, where he was suspected in the murder of the Evans brothers, 2 young boys he had molested while living with their family. He had worked at a church camp on the mountain in the nearby town of Twin Peaks. The camp confirmed that they had been closed that particular weekend, so he was free to do as he wished. He had been diagnosed as psychopath and had strong religious fervor. In 1967, the Sheriff's Department was advised that Stewart was now wanted for child molesting and interstate flight to avoid persecution. Now, he was arrested in September 1967 in Arlington, Texas, and detectives flew down to interview him. He was given a polygraph test and showed deception in the results, but continued to deny involvement. Having no hard evidence to tie Stewart to the murdered family, except the possible motive of meeting the young boys, and possibly following them home, the detectives had to leave. Mobile took Stewart back to Alabama to question him in their own investigations, and he was released on bail in Alabama after a witness in his molestation case refused to testify. Stewart is currently serving time in Illinois related to sex crimes against children. The brutal murders of the Bowles family is still unsolved.
In 1975, the town of Teaneck, New Jersey, had 43,000 people. The residents were a comfortable driving distance away from New York City, but felt far enough away from the Big Apple that crime couldn't touch them. But the murder of a family that same year changed everything. This is the story of the Diggs family murders. Let's step into the cold. No one heard or saw a thing that cold December night. Those who lived in the houses surrounding 266 Carlton Terrace lay fast asleep in their beds. The children who lived on the street were eagerly awaiting Christmas, which was fast approaching. But their friends that lived in the brick and stucco family home at number 266 would not get to experience another Christmas. Between the hours of 11:30 p.m. on the 5th of December and 2 a.m. on the 6th of December, 1975, Jean Diggs and her 4 children were murdered. Wesley Diggs arrived at his family's home around 4 p.m. on December 6th. Despite having a wife and 4 children, Wesley spent most of his time in NYC. His bar, Diggs' Den, was located in Harlem on 145th Street, and this, coupled with his interest in at least 3 other bars, was his reason for being apart from his family. As he entered the home, the only noise he could hear was the sound coming from a TV in an upstairs bedroom. Wesley was the one who discovered that his family had been murdered. Wesley's 39-year-old wife, Jean, was found slumped on a bench in the basement rec room. She had been shot once in the head and the chest. Wesley's 2 sons, 12-year-old Wesley Jr. and 5-year-old Roger, lay dead in their bunk beds. Both boys had been shot several times. Audrey, aged 17, had been shot 5 times in the head. She was found in her bedroom on the 2nd floor. Finally, the body of 16-year-old Allison was found in her attic bedroom, sprawled across her bed. She had been shot twice. Wesley Sr. never returned to the house. There was no sign of a struggle and no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been taken from the house and there were no signs of sexual assault. Each family member had been shot with a .22 caliber automatic pistol. At the time, it was reported that the police had found 17 spent .22 caliber shells, but the weapon itself has never been found. No trace of DNA evidence was found. When he heard about the murders, Teaneck Police Detective Richard Kaczynski cancelled his imminent vacation to Florida. He would end up spending around 300 hours investigating the murder of the Diggses. Teaneck residents were left reeling in shock from the murders. As the Teaneck police dealt with the investigation, state troopers patrolled the streets. Teaneck had, of course, dealt with crime in the past, but they were usually minor ones. Teaneck citizens had always felt they were at a safe distance from crimes they usually associated with the Big Apple. But now murder had found its way to Teaneck. Wesley Sr. cooperated with the investigation. He'd last seen his family on the morning of December 5th, when he left New Jersey for NYC. He spent the night in the city with friends and returned to Teaneck in the late afternoon of the following day, which was when he found the bodies. He voluntarily took part in a lie detector test, and the results suggested that he was no murderer. He told investigators that he had had several affairs and spent most of his time in NYC. But the police felt that Wesley Sr. wasn't completely forthcoming with information. They suspected that he probably knew why his family was dead. Detective Kaczynski was sure that the murders were avenged by someone that Wesley Sr. had crossed. The Diggses had always been a well-liked family in town. They were respected. At that time, African Americans made up 16% of Teaneck's population. The Diggses became the first African American family to live on Carlton Terrace, part of an upper-middle-class neighborhood, when they moved there from Harlem in 1970. Jean, an Avon lady, was described as a lovely person and a happy mother. The children had friends in the neighborhood. No one wanted to believe that such a pleasant family had been wiped out. Teaneck resident James McManus summed up the town's feelings when he told the New York Times, "This makes you wonder whether there is any place safe left in the United States. It makes me doubt there is. You'd think there is a madman at large." With very little evidence gathered from the crime scene, attempts were made to link the murders of the Diggses to two separate murders in NYC. The Apollo Theatre in Harlem became a crime scene when 18-year-old Daryl Scullock was shot dead there. Investigators learned that there had recently been an incident at Wesley's bar, Diggs' Den. Scullock had been asked to leave the bar due to his involvement in the incident. Then, on December 10th, 38-year-old Stanley Morgan was shot dead by two men using .22 caliber guns in the Shalimar Lounge, located about a mile from Diggs' Den. Morgan, a well-known heroin dealer in the city, had also visited one of Wesley's bars in the weeks before his death. At the time, Bergen County prosecutor Joseph C. Woodcock Jr. said that checks were being made to see if the same weapon was used in both crimes. No official link was ever found between any of these murders. The funerals of Jean and her children took place that same month. 1,000 mourners watched as 5 hearses brought the coffins to the Presbyterian Church of Teaneck. Reverend Robert Chase officiated. He had only been in his role since the start of December. 40 classmates of the 2 eldest children were ushers, forming a cordon on the walk in front of the church. As the service took place, the church was at full capacity. An adjoining room broadcasting the service on a TV was packed. Many more stood outside the church as a sign of respect. Wesley read the individual eulogies for each family member. He had penned them himself. Jean and her children were buried next to each other at the George Washington Memorial Park in Paramos. Wesley never stepped inside 266 Carlton Terrace again. He sold the house the following year. Heartbroken at the loss of his family, he asked President Ford to send in the FBI, but his request was denied. He was critical of the way the media portrayed him and those he knew. Wesley moved to Manhattan, where he fathered a daughter in 1981. He lived out the remainder of his years there, dying of a heart attack in October 1987. He was buried in the family plot. Teaneck has never forgotten those who were lost that winter's night in 1975. Due to Audrey's love of sports at Teaneck High, the Audrey Diggs Memorial Award is presented at the yearly high school sports dinner and is given to a senior female athlete. In the past, the high school also gave a graduating senior a monetary Diggs Memorial Scholarship. A memorial marker at Teaneck High reads, "In Memoriam, the Diggs family. Love is eternal."
I was trying to get a feel for what the late 60s and early 70s would feel like coverage of a family murder. So I looked at the Bricka family, the Diggs family, and the Bowles family. And I hunted around to see if there was anything else. Because what I was really wondering was, were there other unsolved family murders between, say, 1963 and 1972? And I found one, and then I found another one, and then I found another one. Those cases don't really get me to North Carolina, though, but the Bishop family does. So here's what I was looking for, and here's what I wanted to know. When someone kills a family, how is it that they do it? Like, what weapons do they use when a family is massacred? Depending on who the perpetrator is, how do they do it?
Hello, I'm Sidney Katz, president of the Montgomery County Council. One of the most heinous crimes in Montgomery County history was committed 43 years ago. Bradford Bishop, a Bethesda resident, brutally killed his wife, mother, and 3 sons and then disappeared. Bradford Bishop is on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. Joshua Ziggy Popkin sat down to discuss this case with his father, Darren Popkin, the sheriff in Montgomery County. It's a case that has baffled authorities for over 4 decades.
He left the State Department that day, and he drove to a shopping mall, Montgomery Mall, here in Bethesda, Maryland. He went to the Sears store and he bought a hammer, a 2.5-gallon gas can, and then he went to the gas station and filled up that gas can, the 2.5 gallons, with gas, as well as filling his car up to making sure that his car was topped off in gas. He then drove to a hardware store in Potomac, Maryland, and bought a shovel. He then went home, and a little bit later in that evening, he committed just a grisly homicide of his entire family. So William Bradford Bishop was originally from Sacramento, California. He went to Yale for undergraduate and then went to a college in Vermont for his master's degree. He then went into the military. He rose pretty quickly as an officer in the military, and his military experience and expertise was military intelligence. And that's what he did, and he was a Foreign Service worker. He was assigned to embassies throughout the world, mainly in Africa and in Europe. He spoke 5 languages. He took his family to the Swiss Alps skiing on a regular basis. He had a place in Europe where he would actually go skiing regularly. So the people in his neighborhood really believed that he was doing well, and that this was just the next step for him, actually, until he was promoted and moving on to another place somewhere in the world. Well, he had found out that day that he was not being promoted and that he didn't get the job. Although Mr. Bishop wanted to let everyone believe that he was kind of a very wealthy person who lived the high life. In fact, his mother was actually funding the family, and the family was running out of money. So in the evening of March the 1st, 1976, sometime after the family dinner, he took the hammer that he had bought earlier in that day, and while his wife was standing by the front door after putting the 3 children to bed, he took the hammer and hit her in the head and beat her to death with that hammer. He then went room by room while the boys were in their pajamas in their beds and beat them one by one, killing them, his own children, in their bedrooms. At the time of these murders, Mr. Bishop's mother was living in the house, and she had taken their dog, their golden retriever, Leo was his name, outside for a late night walk. Little did she know, when she came back, not only would she find and see Mrs. Bishop beaten to death at the front door, she was going to be the last victim of this particular crime, where William Bradford Bishop took that hammer and also beat his mother to death, and sparing the dog. During that time, he then packed up the car, rolled up the 5 bodies into a tarp, and put all 5 of them at about 11:30 or 12 o'clock time frame, midnight, put them in the back of the car, which ended up being somewhat like a hearse, drove that vehicle from Bethesda, Maryland, straight down to Tyrell County, North Carolina, in a very rural area. He found a logging road that led up to a very wooded forest type area, and he brought the shovel that he had bought earlier, and he brought the gas can with him, and he dug a grave, a shallow grave, but it was deep enough to actually take the bodies that he had just killed of his entire family and bury them on top of each other in that grave. He then took the gas can that he had, emptied the gas can on top of the bodies, and he lit them on fire. At the same time those bodies were burning, it was a period of time where they had not had much rain in that area, so some of the brush and tinder in that area started on fire. There was a forest ranger in the park in that area, and he saw the fire. So what they thought was just somewhat of a brush fire that had started somehow, maybe from a campfire of some sort. Actually, he put out a call for fire folks to come put that fire out. Little did he know that he was going to be showing up at the scene and finding a grave with 5 bodies in it. At the scene, the gas can was left and the shovel was left. About 6 hours passed after him leaving Maryland was about the time, 6 to 8 hours was the time that the bodies were located from that fire. Neighbors of the Bishop family were getting concerned because they didn't tell anybody that they were going away. The mail and the newspapers were starting to build up in front of the house. And several days later, one of the neighbors called 911 and asked the Montgomery County Police Department to come by to check because there was no sign of them. It only took a couple of steps to get into the front residence of that house to see all the blood that was throughout that home. And of course there were no bodies because they were in North Carolina, but you could certainly see by the horrendous crime scene that something terrible had occurred. About 17 days later, in the Great Smoky Mountains in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Mr. Bishop's station wagon that he had driven the bodies down there showed up in a park. Unfortunately, the vehicle was there. As it appeared, William Bradford Bishop disappeared into those woods, and we have never seen him again. On March the 9th, after the investigation initially began, a grand jury in Montgomery County, Maryland, did indict him on 5 counts of capital murder. Those warrants are still outstanding. If Mr. Bishop is ever brought to justice, he will be tried. He was born in 1936. He was almost 83 years old. So if he is ever brought to justice, those indictments, those warrants are still active, and I am confident that he would still be, based on the evidence that we have, he will still be tried and convicted here in Montgomery County. But then we had also found out through the investigation that things weren't as good as they thought, that Mr. Bishop and his wife were having marital trouble, that they were both seeing a therapist, that Mr. Bishop had been prescribed antidepressants for more than a year, and that his depression was getting worse, and that this somehow not getting that job, running out of money, marital trouble, his wife wanting to go back to work, all somehow played into this unbelievably heinous act of killing his entire family. So the case is now 43 years old, but those victims that were killed, that beautiful family that was killed, they don't have a voice. So the only voice that can be for them is to continue the search. We have never had any confirmation that Mr. Bishop is deceased. We have done DNA profiles. We have in the international search for Mr. Bishop, we have him listed as a red flag throughout the world. So should there be an unidentified body somewhere found, and they do some DNA testing on it, we hope that would match it up. When the grand jury in Montgomery County indicted Mr. Bishop, 43 years ago, we started the search for him, and it has led investigators, including myself, to multiple locations throughout the United States. I have been to a number of places throughout the United States on very credible leads that ultimately turned out not to be actual William Bradford Bishop. But we have also had what we believe to be sightings of Bishop throughout the world, to include Basel, Switzerland, to include Sorrento, Italy. So one of the first international leads came in the early 90s. I believe it was 1993, if I remember correctly. It was in Basel, Switzerland. There was a neighbor of Mr. Bishop's who lived right down the street from him, who was actually very, very close with the family. They used to play tennis together. The children knew each other. So this was not just someone that, in passing just happened to maybe see him down the street every once in a while. This is people that knew each other. That Bishop and his wife Annette would play tennis with the man and women. They were vacationing in Basel, Switzerland. And while they were on a commuter train at a station, they looked over at the opposite train going that was also on the platform, going in the opposite direction. But the windows matched up with each other. And she just happened to look out the window to see who was coming onto their train. And while the man in the train across from them that was going in the other direction was doing the same thing, their eyes matched, and she was 100% sure that it was Bishop, and he saw her and recognized her. Unfortunately, the trains went in opposite directions. We were notified after she returned home and notified the police in that area of Basel, Switzerland, and they did a search. They went back to where the train station came in for a number of mornings to see whether or not that particular train would have that person on it and be able to identify it. And has been throughout the years, that person that she said was on that train, who she 100% believed to be Bishop because she knew him, never was on that train again. One of the things that he was responsible for was the creation of passports. So he could have made a passport up under a different name. He could have left the country at the time because it was much easier to get in and out of airports on and off a plane. It wasn't the security, there was no entry-level security back then like there is now, which is very detailed entry-level security. It was easy to get in and out. So, he could be the guy next door in the United States, or he could be in Europe, or he could be anywhere, and we'll continue searching throughout the entire world until we get word that he is either deceased or too old to possibly be alive. Just to think about that beautiful family being killed in that way is just incredible. Even after 43 years later, is incredibly difficult to discuss and talk about. There's nothing more that I would like to do is put those handcuffs on Mr. Bishop and then question him, number one, to where he has been over the last 43 years, and the big question, why?
William Bradford Bishop Jr., a man wanted for murdering his wife, 3 sons, and his mother, is the latest addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list.
To be able to take a hammer to your children's heads and faces while they're sleeping, I think, really exhibits the brutality of the crime.
I'm Molly Halpern of the Bureau with Wanted by the FBI. Bishop, a former U.S. State Department employee, killed his family on March 1st, 1976, the same day he learned he had been passed over for a promotion. Bishop, an insomniac, had been under psychiatric care for depression. Case agent Charles Adams says Bishop then drove to North Carolina, where he
dug a shallow grave, and laid the bodies in that shallow grave, and then proceeded to set them on fire.
The next day, Bishop was seen buying tennis shoes with a woman his age and what may have been the family dog. His car was found at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and inside were maps and hiking information.
He was an avid outdoorsman. Not only that, he had an aptitude for learning languages: Spanish, Serbo-Croatian, French, Italian.
Bishop is also a pilot. A $100,000 reward is being offered for information leading to Bishop's arrest. Report tips to 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit FBI.gov.
There's this one thing that gets left out of Bishop's story. In the time leading up to the murders, there's a disagreement over whether or not the family was experiencing financial troubles. On the one hand, people say they weren't. On the other hand, there was possibly a looming tax audit that might have been a source of a stressor. But regardless of that, Bishop was having trouble with depression and insomnia, and he was on a benzodiazepine called Xerax in the time leading up to the murders. That particular drug, it's not really looked at, whereas with McDonald, they say, oh, this drug causes psychotic outbursts. With Bishop, they don't take the same approach. And he is still out there today.
What happens when a narrative takes the place of reality?
The infamous crime happened back in 1970.
Dr. Jeffrey McDonald has been charged with the murders of his pregnant wife and their 2 young daughters. McDonald blamed the crime on a group of hippies.
Either Jeffrey McDonald slaughtered his family and then tried to hide that fact, or there were intruders imitating the Manson family, including a girl with a floppy hat who attempted to kill him and killed his family.
The jury was convinced he's in prison.
Well, they are innocent people in jail.
If somebody kills your daughter and 2 grandchildren, are you supposed to sit back and do nothing about it?
It's got to have been a painful experience.
Very painful. Emotionally, financially.
This was a good man who loved his children.
Jeff's not the kind of guy who does this.
This case had so much publicity. It was on the headlines every day.
A best-selling book, the miniseries.
The television movie Fatal Vision.
Millions of people saw Jeffrey MacDonald killing his family. It solidified people's views about the case.
Does it seem strange to you that no one else has confessed?
It's not really quite accurate to say that no one has confessed.
This was the lady in the floppy hat.
She said she was involved in the Jeffrey MacDonald murders.
You think it is a personal vendetta against you?
The easy answer is to jump and say yes.
That's the thread you grab and you start pulling on it till you unravel the damn sweater.
The mystery is about what happened in that house. Many, many people have gone back over this. Wandering in that wilderness of conflicting evidence, of mistakes, of errors. When you think it's over with, the story is just beginning.
Apparently enjoying his newfound celebrity, MacDonald continued to try his own case in the court of public opinion.
My next guest is Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald.
On December 15th, 1970, MacDonald appeared on the popular late-night program, The Dick Cavett Show.
I hope this isn't too painful for you.
Where it became very clear MacDonald was fast becoming his own worst enemy.
My wife came home and we had a before-bedtime drink, really, and watched the beginning of a late-night talk show.
He knew how to do it, as we say in the talk show trade. He knew how to handle himself.
Dick Cavett remembers well the night he was face-to-face with MacDonald.
His affect is wrong, totally wrong. My affect was, gee, to find your wife and kids murdered. And even his answer to that was something like, hey, yeah, isn't that something? Almost sounded like Bob Hope. Very like Bob Hope.
There were people in the Army who wanted a court-martial regardless of any evidence.
I was angry.
You were very critical, in fact, of the Army.
I'm sure I was.
Where are these investigators now who did the original?
Well, most of them have been transferred. It's the Army way of handling things. If someone really fouls up, you either give them a medal or you transfer them.
Watching the show that night, Colette's family was extremely disturbed by MacDonald's appearance. Colette's older brother, Robert Stevenson.
All he spoke about was how his rights had been violated. I don't think he once mentioned about, let's get the murderers, my family's been killed. But I remember him grinning like a Cheshire cat.
Up till now, everything was totally normal. There was nothing unusual at all in our life that we were aware of. The next thing I knew, I was awakened on the couch, and I was awakened by a combination of hearing my wife screaming for help and asking for me, and my older daughter, five-year-old, yelling, screaming for help, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And my wife was saying, "Jeff, Jeff, why are they doing this? Help, Jeff." And I started to push up. There was a little light on in the kitchen, which is a small apartment, and there was some light in the living room from this light in the kitchen. And there were, to my immediate view, 3 people. It turned out there were 4, but I saw 3 people, a black male, 2 white males. The black male had on an army jacket with E6 sergeant stripes. And in the ensuing struggle, there were 2 episodes of time, very, very brief, in which I saw what I took to be a white female in a broad floppy hat with stringy blonde hair. And I heard her say, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." I heard her say that more than once, and also the term acid and rain. It was raining outside at the time. But as I awakened on the couch, I didn't know what was going on. I heard my wife, I heard my daughter, and I saw these people, and I either said, and I to this day don't know if I said it or thought I was going to say it, "What the hell are you doing here? Who are you? What's going on?" and the black male to my left raised something, and he swung a club at me, and I threw my hand up, and he hit me in the head with a club, which I took to be a baseball bat. He drove me back to the couch that I was sleeping on, and now my head was ringing, and I was having a hard time getting up, and the comforter was still over my legs, but I pushed back up, and I'm trying to, and I was getting struck in the chest and about the head, and I threw my hand up again and took another blow to the side of the head. And during this time, I suddenly developed a real severe chest pain. And I remember real distinctly thinking to myself, this guy throws a hell of a punch. And I presume that was the stab wound that collapsed my lung.
Is your wife still screaming, or is that stopped?
I don't know. I don't know when it stopped. I heard her, and the voice rings in my ears to this day, so I don't know when it stopped.
So you're now cut and hit, and you're lying on the couch?
I didn't know I was being cut. I was, all of a sudden, in this struggle, I'm trying to push these people away and get up at the same time. I finally got my left leg on the floor, and that gave me a little leverage, and I started to move forward, and I finally grabbed the black male's arm as he swung it, and he kept jerking his arm away to pull the weapon away, and my hand kept sliding down on the weapon, which is how I know it was a baseball bat, because it was smooth.
Who called, then they left?
Well, the next thing I knew, I was tumbling towards the floor, and I saw the bare knee of what I took to be this white female, and I saw the top of boots. At the time, they were called go-go boots. They were light in color, and they were glistening like they were wet. When I came to, the house was silent, and my first memory, as strange as it sounds, is the smell of Johnson's floor wax. My face was on the floor, and to this day, if I walk in a room that's recently waxed, I get a very weird feeling. Because
did you call the MPs or the police? Or
when I went down into the master bedroom and found my wife brutally murdered, I tried to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It didn't work, and eventually I made my way to 2 other bedrooms and found my children in the same state. I called the MPs.
This case is very bizarre. If someone were to write a fiction novel with a man named Charles Manson, who gets out of the federal penitentiary, 1967, goes up to the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, when it was kind of a mecca for hippies around the country, surrounds himself with a young bunch of boys and girls from average American homes. They get themselves a black school bus, start traveling up and down the state of California. Their lifestyle, sex orgies, LSD trips. Manson convinces his followers that he's the second coming of Christ and the devil, all wrapped up into one person. Ultimately, he gets them to commit mass murder for him at his command, and he tells them that the purpose for these murders is to start a war between blacks and whites, which he calls helter-skelter. He said this will cause the white community to turn against the black community. At the scene of the crimes, the killers print words from Beatles songs, mind you, in blood. During the war, he tells his family, I'm going to take you to the bottomless pit in the desert, a place he derived from Revelation 9, a chapter in the last book of the New Testament, from which he said he found complete support for his philosophies on life. He said the bottomless pit is a land of milk and honey, 12 types of fruit on every tree. We're going to grow to a size of 144,000 people, which turns out to be the 12 tribes of Israel referred to in Revelation 7. Manson felt that the black man was going to win this war. He said the black man had been stepped on by the white man for centuries. Now it was their turn to take over their karma. But Manson was a racist, and he believed that blacks were subhuman, that they were less evolved than the white man. So he said even though they would win this war, he said they never know how to handle the reins of power because Blackie only knows what Whitey's told him to do. So he said the black man would have to turn over the reins of power to those white people who had survived helter-skelter, i.e. Charles Manson and his family. Then he says, we'll come out of the bottomless pit, and quoting Manson, we'll pat Blackie on his kinky hair, and we'll send him on his way to picking cotton. So when I say the case is bizarre, if someone wrote a novel like that, everyone would consider it bizarre. And Manson himself is an extremely bizarre person. Now, most of these things did not happen, but many of them did, and certainly they were talked about in the Manson family. No, it was a very bizarre case, no question about it.
10:30 p.m., Detective Beasley saw his informant, Helena Stokely, on Hay Street, emerging from a blue Mustang. She was wearing a floppy hat.
She was dressed with a pair of white boots and a wide-brimmed hat on, wearing a wig, a blonde wig, had sort of a miniskirt on.
Beasley recognized the usual group around Helena, including the black man with the sergeant's stripes.
The black man was dressed in an army fatigue jacket on with these 6 sergeant stripes on it.
Who was driving the blue Mustang?
There was a white male in the right front seat, and I believe it was Greg Mitchell.
Mitchell was Helena's boyfriend.
And by now, what time is it?
It's approximately 2 or 3 minutes to 11 o'clock.
Not long afterwards, possibly soon after 12, Helena Stokely and the others arrived at a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant on Bragg Boulevard, watched by another police informant. After one, they left, apparently in the direction of Fort Bragg. At 544 Castle Drive, Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald prepared to go to sleep, but discovered one of his daughters had wet the bed. He claims he lifted her back into her own bed, then took an Afghan blanket and lay down on the couch in the living room.
I put my glasses probably on the table behind me or on the coffee table next to me, and I went to sleep on the couch using one of the pillows on the couch and the Afghan.
At 3:40, the Fayetteville operator connected a call to military police at Fort Bragg. There'd been a stabbing on Castle Drive. Nearing the house, one of the MPs saw a woman standing in the rain.
She was wearing a floppy hat and a wide-brimmed hat and a raincoat and what appeared to be boots.
How unusual was it to see somebody standing there at 3:40 in the morning?
Very unusual.
And ordinarily, if you hadn't been responding to an emergency call, what would you have done?
We'd have stopped, we'd asked her who she was, where she was going, what she was doing there at that time in the morning.
They arrived at the MacDonald house.
Check the location. That's it, folks. That's not one.
The back door was unlocked and it was open. We went into the master bedroom. I observed Colette lying on the floor on her back. Captain McDonald was lying to her left. There was a child in each of the rooms. They were off to the left and to the right of the hallway. And you could see that both children were dead. I observed that the coffee table in the living room was turned on its side, magazines scattered on the floor. And I immediately went back and I got next to McDonald again.
I remember the first thing I said was something like, "Forget me, check my kids, how are my kids?" And he told me they were okay.
Mrs. MacDonald was dead. Above the bed, the word pig written in blood. A knife lay on the carpet. The scene rather resembled the Manson killings. There was blood everywhere, even oddly, on the bathroom sink.
I said, "Who did this?" And he started to describe hippies. He said there were 2 male whites and a male black. He went into a description of the male black. He said the male black had on an army jacket with sergeant stripes. And he said a girl. And the minute he said a girl, I turned around to the lieutenant and I told him, I said, I had observed the girl several blocks from the house. McDonald started to describe her as having a hippie-type girl, floppy hat with muddy white boots holding what he thought was a candle, saying acid is groovy, kill the pigs, hit him again.
MacDonald arrived at Womack Army Hospital, still apparently unaware his family were all dead.
There was nothing we could have done for Colette or the children, but I got the impression that he thought the children were alive.
Before dawn, Dr. Merrill Bronstein drove to the hospital to attend to his injured friend, Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald.
A military wife and her 2 children were found murdered in their home at Fort Bragg early this morning. The husband...
Bronstein, like many others that morning, was afraid of the Manson-type gang MacDonald had so vividly described.
I heard the story several times from his own lips in my presence during that day.
And did you tend to believe him?
Absolutely.
The grisly case developed about 4 a.m. when authorities discovered the victims dead and wounded.
As soon as Detective Beasley heard MacDonald's story, he was sure he knew who the killers were.
Being sought are 4 suspects, including a woman who was described as having long blonde hair, wearing cowboy boots, and carrying a candle. It's believed apparently...
He'd seen his informant, Helena Stokely, identically dressed in long shiny boots and a blonde wig, earlier that night.
The second, a Negro male wearing an Army field jacket with NCO stripes.
As usual, a group had included a black man with the stripes of an E6 sergeant on his jacket. For weeks, Beasley had seen them together in bars and diners up and down Bragg Boulevard.
The word pig was scrawled in blood throughout.
It took him 24 hours to find her.
I said, I know you've read what was in the paper today. I know you've heard it on the radio. Now, were you in MacDonald's house or not? Tears begin to get into her eyes then. She says, I think I was there. I think I saw this thing happen.
He called police headquarters and asked them to pass a message to Fort Bragg. Army CID, not the civilian police, were in charge. He claims the Army never responded. Next morning, an odd thing Helena had said came back to him. While in the MacDonald house, she tried to ride a horse, but the horse was broken. That day's paper had the first picture from inside the house. It showed a hobby horse in the baby's room. The hobby horse, he now believes, was broken. He called Fort Bragg. Maybe Helena really was involved in the murders. The CID, he says, showed no interest.
Still, there was no response.
Nobody ever called you back?
Nobody ever called me back or asked me about it. I thought maybe that they had already decided who had done it, that MacDonald had killed his family, and they didn't want to check it no further.
The Army post of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, some bizarre murders took place last night, which the base provost marshal says are reminiscent of the Sharon Tate.
All unidentified were stabbed to death in the bedroom area of their home in the Corregidor Court housing project on post in what military authorities are now terming a ritualistic killing.
544 Castle Drive should have been sealed immediately. Instead, it overflowed with investigators.
What were all those people doing?
Just adding to the confusion.
Did they have a right to be there?
Had I been in charge, they wouldn't have all been in there, no.
So who was in charge?
I don't know.
With inexperienced MPs swarming over the House, this was no pristine FBI investigation.
People were in there just gawking around, looking at things. Some of the ranking officers came down, I think, out of curiosity more than anything else. The entire scene was a zoo.
And there's nothing that you could do about that?
Not me, no. I was only a soldier.
Evidence was moved, even lost. MacDonald's pajama bottoms were thrown away. What seemed to be a piece of skin found under Colette's fingernail vanished. Even so, some things were clear. The living room, supposedly the scene of a life-or-death struggle between a Green Beret and a savage gang, seemed curiously neat. Valentine cards were still standing. Yet there was carnage in the bedroom, with threads and fluff from MacDonald's blue pajamas everywhere. Most extraordinary, while his family had been stabbed and clubbed, MacDonald, logically the target, was relatively unscathed. His only serious injury was a deep cut in his chest, which had partially collapsed a lung.
He was bruised and had abrasions, and he had 3 lacerations, one in his upper abdomen, one in his left arm, and one in the right chest.
Did any of those threaten his life?
Not in my opinion.
In time, Army investigators would come to believe MacDonald inflicted his own chest injury.
Can you imagine inflicting that kind of wound on yourself?
I don't think that I personally could have done it, but I think that someone of strong will and reasonable medical knowledge could have done that.
Somebody with an incentive to do it?
Possibly.
And he would be certain, that person, that he would not administer a fatal wound?
Not with the appropriate instrument.
Dr. MacDonald was invited to a nondescript building on Fort Bragg and read his rights. He told his story without emotion, then, when he realized he was chief suspect, broke down.
No one ever had as good a life as I had. What I've got to reckon for? I thought it was a doctor. Jesus, I had a beautiful wife who loved me, 2 kids who were great. It doesn't make any sense.
Today, incarcerated in Terminal Island Jail, MacDonald tells much the same story as he did in 1970. The night of the murders, he'd fallen asleep on the living room sofa.
Initially I saw 3 people standing at the foot of the couch. I saw 1 black male and 2 white males. And I couldn't figure out what was going on.
Then he claims he saw a girl in a floppy hat and off-white boots talking in a strange monotone.
What I heard was, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." And I believe I heard that twice at first. That was the first thing that I remember hearing. But it's very jumbled because that's mixed up with my wife screaming, "Jeff, help me," and my daughter screaming.
The girl, he thought, carried a torch or a candle. A black man next to her had a club.
He had on a fatigue jacket, an army jacket with E6 stripes on the sleeve, and that was very close to my eyes. I saw that very clearly.
Then, he says, he noticed a knife.
I just, for literally a millisecond, saw a glint. The light must have just hit the blade just right, and I just saw it for a split second, and I thought, I'm getting stabbed.
His pajama top now tangled round his hands. He tried to defend himself.
The top must have been jerked over my head as they were trying to pull me off the couch. And now suddenly it's between my wrists, but my hands are still bound up. And I still, to this day, I can still awaken from a bad dream and be struggling to get my hands out. And feeling this, what I can only classify as like a rain of blows, and thinking the whole time, I've let go of the club, now I'm going to get clubbed again. And that apparently is what happened, because I was eventually driven off that end of the couch onto the 2 stairs that led into the master bedroom.
Investigators have endlessly pored over the next part of MacDonald's story. The exact sequence of events is critical.
The only way I can describe it that makes any sense to me is a series of, like, Polaroids. The memory is not clear, except for very vivid single pictures.
If MacDonald's story is true, his assailants left him unconscious in the passage. Just after 3, he stumbled into the bedroom, found his wife's body, and, in a protective gesture, would later cover her with his own torn and bloody pajama top.
Like her right shoulder was up against the chair and her feet were towards the back door. But the overwhelming thing was the amount of blood in the room. And there was a knife in the middle of her chest. And all I can think of, all I can recall is another one of those photographic pictures I have burned into my memory, and that's trying to get the pajama top off my hands.
He claims he then went looking for his children.
And I went first to Kimmy, and then I went, after Kimmy, I went to Christy. At least that's how I remember it today.
Having tried, he says, to revive his family, he called for help.
I remember dialing O. I didn't know what else to do, and I dialed O, and someone came on the phone. And she said, "What can I do?" And I said, "You know, we need help. There have been stabbings."
That call was logged at 3:40. Then he says he went outside, looked for his assailants, toured the house again, and oddly washed his hands.
I don't know why I washed my hands. I guess because I'm a physician. I don't know.
All this and more took place in the 2 minutes before he spoke to the operator again at 3:42.
And I said, we need help. We need medics, ambulances. You know, we need MPs. I said, we've been stabbed. We're dying.
In 1970, the Army didn't believe a word of it.
The Army has charged Green Beret Dr. Jeffrey McDonald with the murders of his pregnant wife and their 2 young daughters at Fort Bragg, North Carolina last February.
At a military hearing, Army prosecutors presented their case. McDonald had murdered his family, staged the scene, then knifed himself with a scalpel.
Did you inflict those wounds yourself?
No, that's preposterous. I did not inflict wounds on myself.
The prosecution theory was that McDonald had invented the intruders after reading a magazine story about satanic cults. A family friend said McDonald had brought the story to his attention. It did sound rather familiar. The devil just looks groovier. Acid is incredible. It was a claim that McDonald dismissed.
Anyone who got Esquire magazine was familiar with those terms. I mean, there were millions of people familiar with those terms. It was sort of standard issue back in 1969.
McDonald claims the murders were done by hippie-type intruders who also stabbed him.
Evidence on both sides was circumstantial and confused. Throughout, Freddie Kassab, Colette's stepfather, insisted on McDonald's innocence.
The Army contends my daughter and 2 grandchildren excuse me, suffered in excess of 80 stab wounds. What they want the public to believe is that a sane man, and they charge premeditation, mind you, sat down and planned to perform such an act. I don't believe anybody in this country will believe that a sane man would do this.
So emotional was he, so obsessively determined to clear his son-in-law, that he and his wife offered a $5,000 reward for new information. Soon a new witness did come forward. He was the neighbor of Helena Stokely, the woman who seemed to fit McDonald's description. He'd seen her come home in a blue car at 4 a.m. the night of the murders.
I went to the front door and, sat there and watched them, And I remember Helena getting out and going to the house.
What type of car was it?
It was the Mustang. It was definitely the Mustang.
The description was familiar. The blue Mustang, the black friend, Helena in her blonde wig.
Big hat she had on her hat, the big floppy hat. With the lighting situation like it was, I couldn't give any other details. Now, the guys all had on their usual field jacket garb.
Next to Helena, they say, was her boyfriend, Greg Mitchell. Later, on drugs, teetering on the brink between the rational and irrational, Helena told the Posies she was present at the murders.
We got into conversation about murder, and I point blank asked her, was she involved in it? I said, well, did you do it? And her remark to me was that all she did was held the candles, that she didn't participate in any of the killing.
On the night of the murders, a military policeman had seen a girl in a floppy hat standing in the rain. Helena told the Posies she thought she'd been spotted.
I can't remember. She told me a MP car had passed by, or if I remember right, it was something about an MP car or something, and she felt like she had been spotted,
And she was worried?
And she was real concerned about it. She was real worried about it,
After Posey testified, the chief Army investigator did interview Helena, but inexplicably took no notes and let her go.
All that, and it sounds so out of order and so discombobulated, right? This case has spawned 4 documentaries and 3 feature films and countless books. Yeah, it's disjointed and it's out of order. And as much as I'm a fan of true crime, I'm also a critic of true crime. And the reason I tell this so disjointedly and out of order is because unless you hear it that way, you're going to come to certain assumptions about this case that I don't think are true.
This case, where we lead in this episode, is there's a document in this case that I do not understand how it has been used in a court. I have read all of the arguments related to this document, and we're just getting to that one document today. I still cannot wrap my head around how this case went to court.
The thing that happens that's really a problem is that his stepfather-in-law, Freddie Kassab, he believes in his innocence until he doesn't. And you can't really tell what the turning point is, but it seems to be Jeffrey McDonald was a philanderer, and Freddie Kassab found it shocking when he found that out. And he spends multiple years demanding that the Justice Department open this case and re-examine the murders, and then if the Army won't do it, that the FBI should. Well, Jeffrey McDonald's life takes this turn off into left field where he's sort of just trying to live. And it doesn't matter if you think that he's grieving his family or if he's trying to avoid the murder part of things, being charged with murder, being called a murderer. The gist of it is he spends the next 8 years and change a free man, but not an emotionally free person. It gets into the Justice Department's hands, and basically the FBI doesn't want anything to do with this case. So between 1972 and 1974, it's just in legal limbo. There's a lot of debates that are going on related to the opposite of the civilian court. What we see is like a defense attorney has had a conviction and they are trying to prepare for appellate procedures. But realistically, that's not what happened. The defendant has been sort of exonerated at the Army level. Freddie Kassab really wants justice for his stepdaughter. And he spends a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of resources getting attorneys to compile information against McDonald. And the whole point of this is he is basically requesting a federal grand jury. And that is where this document comes in. That is something I have never seen before. I don't think we'll ever see it again. I've seen something similar, but I've not seen it done this way. What Freddie Kassab manages to do is, as a civilian and the father-in-law of a murder victim, he manages to get Jeffrey McDonald federally indicted on 3 counts of murder. And it would have been 4 if it was today, because Colette was pregnant. You have to think about that for a second and kind of wrap your head around what's going on there. A civilian family member of a murder victim manages to get before a federal grand jury to indict his son-in-law, former son-in-law. I don't know how that works when someone passes away, their step-son-in-law. But the gist of it is the stepfather of Colette McDonald manages to get Jeffrey McDonald indicted for 3 counts of murder.
Right. And so just to add to that, just a smidge. So the Article 32 hearing, it would be essentially almost like a preliminary hearing. Like it's not...
it's a probable cause hearing.
Well, and most of the time when this occurs, it's nothing. They just go, okay, we're going to charge them. And they're like, okay. And they move forward. The thing that was differed in Jeffrey McDonald's case was that he had his own civilian lawyer come in, and on top of the military attorneys that he had, they made a big deal out of it. And so that was where it sort of diverted. It's important to understand that when Colonel Rock made his report, the case was over at that point in time as far as Jeffrey McDonald was concerned. There was nobody investigating, okay? They had done an investigation. The investigation had yielded a report that said, this investigation does not show that Jeffrey McDonald, that there's enough evidence that Jeffrey McDonald is guilty of this crime. What should have happened was the Fayetteville police or somebody else, they should have started looking for the other suspects. The military police and the criminal investigative division, they believed, regardless of what the Article 32 conclusion was, they believed that Jeffrey McDonald was responsible. And so they did not continue an investigation. It left this whole weird gap because they've said we can't move forward with a trial against him. The investigators for the Army have said, well, he did it, so I guess that means we're done investigating. It didn't immediately fall into anyone else's jurisdiction. It seemed to me like the Article 32 hearing was essentially pointless because nobody respected the decision that was made. So keeping that in mind, the case that was essentially thrown out by the Army, it doesn't change all that much, ever. It is what it is from the very beginning.
Thanks for joining us. This podcast was made possible by LabrottieCreations.com. LabrottieCreations.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their Fun Pop Pet Art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pet. Use the promo code CRIMEXS for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art for your own pet at their site, LabrottieCreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. You can reach us at our website, truecrimexs.com, or at our email at truecrimexs@gmail.com. You can leave us a voice message or call us or text us at 252-365-5593. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more. You can come over and check us out at patreon.com, sometimes on Twitter and Instagram, all at True Crime XS.
This is True Crime XS.
Right now on WRAL, the man who wrote a book on one of North Carolina's most notorious murder cases takes the stand in a hearing that could lead to a new trial. A judge has heard testimony all week in the hearing for Jeffrey McDonald. Good evening, I'm Gerald Owens.
And I'm Jackie Hyland. Thanks for joining us. McDonald was convicted of killing his family at their Fort Bragg apartment in 1970. The former Army captain has maintained his innocence ever since, and now he hopes new evidence and charges of misconduct by the prosecution will persuade a judge to give him a new trial. Brian Mims was in court in Wilmington today when the author of Fatal Vision took the stand.
Joe McGinnis was there. August 1979. The defense team at long last had the elusive Helena Stokely in a room of their own. Jeffrey McDonald's lawyers had heard people tell of the things she supposedly said, that she was in the McDonald apartment on the night his wife and 2 daughters were murdered. 33 years later, McGinnis read from his book Fatal Vision, describing how the late Bernie Siegel, McDonald's lead lawyer, coaxed her for 3 hours to say she was involved. The known drug addict said, "No, I can't help you." Now, on the stand, McGinnis heard for the first time the transcript of the bench meeting with the judge the day after that interview. Siegel said that Stokely had confessed to the crime, that she remembered the blood on her hands. Hearing that, McGinnis said, "He was lying. I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but to stand before the judge and make up stuff, this is ridiculous." McGinnis said he thought Siegel had provided him with transcripts of all bench meetings, but never received this one. "Believe me," he said, "it would have been in the book." McGinnis said sitting through the trial had convinced him of McDonald's guilt. But during cross-examination, the author read letters he wrote to McDonald after the conviction in which he said total strangers could see that you did not get a fair trial and that the verdict would not stick. McGinnis's response, he could not make McDonald think the book would be unfavorable to him and risk losing his cooperation, though he did want to believe McDonald was innocent. "Psychopaths are very charming people," he said, "but it was a tough fight between my head and my heart." McGinnis left court Friday, still under oath.
I can't learn anything. I can't follow the media accounts of it. I can't talk to any other witnesses about their testimony.
Defense lawyers asked McGinnis if he knew of anyone who's profited more from the story than he has, to which he said no, because they haven't done the work he has. Brian Mims, WRAL News, Wilmington.
McDonald's lawyers are relying on a statement from federal marshal who said Helena Stokely told prosecutors she was involved and was threatened to be charged with murder. They also have DNA testing that shows 3 hair samples from the home could not be traced to anyone in McDonald's family. The hearing resumes Monday morning.
Hoping for a sincere performance, but open to finding the moment. finding out where I'm headed now. Looking for a sign of disaster so I can make it there faster. I'm weighing the consequences out. I can see in all directions. It's all open to interpretation, but I see colors that are breaking from the other side, the other side. When I make mountains out of summer trails, when I buckle under all the details, I'll keep going till I make it to the other side, the other side. Can you tell me the secret of how you can take it or leave it? How you can blend in with the crowd? I'm so scared, so damn afraid to look. I'm so sick of talking. I'm wearing the words out, words out. I can see in all directions. It's all open to interpretation, but I see colors that are breaking from the other side, the other side. When I make mountains out of summer trails, when I buckle under all the details, I'll keep going till I make it to the other side, the other side. When it feels like everyone's out to get